Okay, I think we are live. I am gonna give folks time. Okay, we're live. Gonna give folks time to join us. Gonna go ahead and share the page on my personal page so that folks know it's happening. But good morning to folks as they're beginning to join. Let's see. Happening now, the final week of Interlocking Justice with Peace of Christ Church. Join us. Okay, that is shared. Give folks a chance to join. And you know what I'm going to do? Because I know it always causes a problem. In case someone messages or something. Hey Siri, put my computer on Do Not Disturb. You gotta love technology. All right, now no one can bother us. All right, Aurelia said hello. Hi. And we have Amanda with us. We'll give folks a couple more minutes before we get started. If you're with us, because I see some other eyes, say hello so I know who you are. It's our final week together. I'll give a couple more minutes. Okay. As you can see from my background, I'm back in my place and not at that bed and breakfast. So hopefully there will be no more bugs flying at me and terrifying me. Hi, Amanda. No more unexpected visitors. Okay. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started, and folks can join as they already are ready. We have someone. Pete just joined us. Pete and Pat, it looks like, or Pete Pat. I'm not sure, but hello, Pete and Pat, or Pete Pat. All right. So hello, everyone. This is our last week together. I am AnaYelsi. I really hope this has been a good and an enriching experience for you. I've really enjoyed it. I know this has been the last few weeks has been a lot of information between the last 3 weeks and today. It'll essentially add up to what is maybe 90 minutes of conversation. Um, but it gives you a small taste of this labor of love of mine that is called Interlocking Justice. So I appreciate the time you have spent with me talking about this. Um, so last week we dived into the second and third practice on the Interlocking Justice Continuum. We talked about community practice, which is referring to how we approach the dynamics within a single group, and convergence practice, referring to how we approach the relationship between two or more distinct communities. Oh, Aurelia said it's been a great experience. Thanks. Um, and the challenge I left you with for last week was to start by taking an individual approach and to the practices that I'd shared, and to ask yourself, what collectives are you a part of? What groups are you a part of within those collectives? And what are the ways in which you can advocate for an interlocking approach to relationships within those communities? What could be accomplished as a result of that? So that was your challenge for last week. Um, which brings us to our final conversation together, which is kind of sad. Um, but our final conversation, the final practice we have to cover of the 5 practices of interlocking justice, is expansive practice. So, expansive practice refers to how we approach the relationships between two or more individual movements. So when I say movements, I'm referring to people or groups that are focused on different justice issues or problems. So for example, LGBTQ justice as opposed to disability justice or racial justice or gender based violence. So, people who are focused on different areas of justice within the greater umbrella of justice, the greater movement for justice. Um, so, where they're trying to do it and how they're trying to do it may change, it being justice. But expansive practice is always referring to groups that are trying to do something different. They operate in these different spaces. Movements are overwhelmingly shaped by a shared identity or cause. Oh, good morning, Mary Alexandra. People come to a particular movement because they or someone they know has been affected by whatever is being championed within that space. Um, that's often how you come to a movement. Some individuals will go wherever they perceive injustice because most of us plant our most of us plant our flags in a select few areas. They're determined by our interests. That's what we're passionate about. That's what we care about. It can be really hard to redirect our attention somewhere else. We know what gets us out of bed in the morning. It's really hard to split your commitment across movements because you only have so much time in a day. You only have so much energy. Um, Expansive practice, that's part of why this is difficult. It requires shifting or expanding our allegiance beyond kind of your movement with the little m to the movement with the capital M. And but what it does is it ensures a sustainable force for justice, where nurturing our collective capacity and desire for change, regardless of the immediate issue at hand. And that's really hard for people if the reason they got involved in the first place is because of this one issue that might even be connected to this one person or this one event. Um, this is not the same as when we talked about convergence practice, where people are coming together but they're still passionate about the same issue. And this is not the same as two movements working together purely because it's mutually beneficial, though it's like it still might be beneficial to them. This is a partnership that it's not rooted in transaction, it's supposed to be rooted in relationship. Expansive practice is about coming together and having it be rooted in relationship, not what we can get from each other. It's where we lock one movement into another, or more accurately, where we acknowledge that they were interlocked in the first place, and so we respond accordingly to that new revelation, to that new acknowledgement of how they are naturally interlocked. Good morning, Aspen. Afternoon, Aspen. Um, so, adopting an interlocking approach to these relationships, or really any part of the continuum, is not just about the how. As I've mentioned before, it's a paradigm shift around the why we do things, and then the how we do them. So, with expansive practice, it's moving from we should work together because we each have something to gain for our own independent movement to we want to work together because our movement is and has always been a part of this greater movement. It's this new acknowledgement of that and then working out of that. So, some starting point examples of an interlocking approach may begin with an acknowledgement of one movement's impact on another. So we talked a little bit about this before for convergence practice, but an example again might be a climate change organization recognizing the ableism in doing an anti disposable straw campaign and then choosing a new approach, like recognizing that their old approach was ableist and deciding to go in a new direction. That's one step towards an interlocking approach. um, that might then evolve as they go deeper into an expansive approach to actually partnering with other movements. That climate organization might partner with a disability justice organization and create an anti-ableist campaign for lowering dependency on plastic, one that's not ableist and one that does acknowledge impact on the environment. So it's two separate movements working together across movement lines, getting out of their silos and creating something new together that benefits both movements and that is built on relationship. That requires an expansive practice posture. That's something new. Hi, Phil. Phil is saying hello. So that is sort of the range of how expansive practice can take. It's just first beginning with considering the impact that your movement might be having on other movements, and then actually beginning to partner with those other movements. So we talked about convergence, how it's partnering with groups within your own movement and making those considerations. Now expansive is other movements, people who aren't even doing the same work as you, and figuring out how you impact them and how you might work with them. It's going even bigger picture. Expansive practice carries a unique degree of risk, so it also carries an immense amount of strategy and intentionality. Um, Once you've moved your own group into an interlocking, expansive approach to your work, you have to start considering benefits and harms you may create for others, incorporating new values into your movement and into your work, and then think about engaging other groups. So it is not an overnight process. It is very slow moving. And I realize I use that language a lot for all of these different practices. Slow moving, a lot of intentionality, not overnight. There is risk. But I just need, like, I'm not trying to hammer that home, but it really is just, it's taking a posture of we're learning and we're pausing and we're being considerate constantly, and we're always in a space of assessing, like, how are we doing, what are we doing, why are we doing it. So while we're doing that assessing, there are some things that I call crucial considerations for any of the practices within the continuum. But first, I want to read Aurelia's thought. I can see how we've done some of this somewhat organically in our church's history. Being aware and having language like this makes living into it so much more intentional and consistent. Good. I'm glad that's helpful. Um, so crucial considerations. There's always a lot to consider. There's things that are constantly going to come up of, oh, we need to think of this and we need to do that. Anytime you're trying to employ the practices, whether as an individual or as a group, but there's a few things that different parts, like, no matter what part of interlocking justice you're doing, you always want to consider these things, the crucial considerations. Um, so yeah, there's no one way, no one process, no one timeline, but I want you to keep these in mind. So the first one is, how did it get this way? I want people to ask, um, to acknowledge that interlocking justice is a response to recognizing something is not the way we want it to be or how we intended it to be. So there may be a multitude of reasons why it isn't what we desire. So we need to take time and ask how it got that way, so that we're not unintentionally or unnecessarily sabotaging ourselves as you work to create something new. So, how did it get this way? Is the first consideration. What is our context? Is the next consideration. So, when you're trying to build something new, we need to take time into account what is happening in that particular moment in time. So asking, what is the context? Consider not only what makes sense for a group, but what makes sense in that particular moment in time. So yeah, maybe generally it would make sense to start partnering with another organization. Maybe expansive practice sounds really exciting, but maybe it doesn't right now because your head pastor or your executive director just took paternity leave or maternity leave. And without them at the helm, it doesn't make sense to take on such a new and exciting partnership. So, what's happening in this moment? What is the context? Then, What about the power? Aurelia said, how did it get this way? Oof. It's always a hard question, taking a look inside and really thinking about, like, why is it this way? It's hard for people. Um, this next question is also really hard for people. What about the power? Power is always a factor, and it's a really hard conversation for folks. The word power can be really scary for folks. For some, it just has nothing but negative connotation. For some, it's really intimidating. Um, but power is always going to be a factor no matter what the community is. The relationship a group has to it is going to be a defining characteristic of their interlocking approach to justice. So if you can't talk about power, who has it, how they employ it, you're not going to do interlocking justice well. It's just not going to happen. Power is going to determine what stories get told, what voices get the mic, what action gets taken, and who's going to get to emerge as leaders. Everything else that we've talked about over the last 4 weeks could be done seamlessly. And if you ignore how power functions, everything else about this is going to fall apart. So you have to ask the question, what about the power? How is power moving in this space? Next, you want to ask, are we being realistic? So as a group, you got to look at the context and the history and get a clearer picture of things and say, what can realistically be achieved? And how can we ensure that we're going to achieve this? Um, so look at timeline, look at resources. What impact can you currently expect to have on like things as they are on the current status quo? Even success is going to feel like failure if what you've slated for your expected success is so ridiculous and over the top that it's unachievable. So when you do make successes and you're just looking at this other ridiculous goal, you're not noticing all the wonderful things you accomplished. So are you being realistic? And that doesn't mean don't dream big. It doesn't mean don't set ambitious goals. Ambitious and realistic can coincide with one another. So are you being realistic? And then finally, and this one is really important, are we communicating? So if you run around acting without verbalizing intent and making sure that you're bringing along everyone, or at least as many people as you can in the process, you're going to be doing a disservice to everyone involved. Groups need to communicate during every step of this process because, as I keep reiterating, it is hard. It's an arduous process. It asks so much of people. And if you're not communicating, you're really going to harm people in this process. So, talking, making sure there's a common language that's been established, that everyone understands the terminology you're using, what you mean by what you say, um, that you're checking in regularly, that boundaries are being set, that people are acknowledging that boundaries aren't fixed. So you're making sure that you're always revisiting what are the goals and the capacity and the commitment. That these are things that are regularly being communicated and reassessed. Um, and I actually forgot one. How are you defining progress? So a big thing that's important is celebrating together. And you can't celebrate if you don't know what growth looks like, if you don't know what victory looks like, and you don't know how you're going to take stock of things. So figure out a plan for how you track progress, whatever progress might look like. Um, if you're like me and you love a good spreadsheet, I love a spreadsheet. Um, so if you're that kind of community or that kind of person, figure that out. If you want to have weekly conversations or meetings, whatever it is that it takes to get everybody on the same page, figure that out so that you have a way that you're tracking progress. Um, so that you know when there are things to celebrate, when you know there are things that need work, and you know how to measure quantifiable change. And you could point and say, we were there, we got here, we have this much left to go. It's really important to be able to say that. Um, so finally, the things I want to go over are the benefits. So we've talked a lot and of here's the continuum, here's this framework, here are all of these practices, here's how hard it's going to be, here's how much it's going to ask of you. Why bother? Um, there are a lot of benefits to doing this. We can't go through all of them in this very brief amount of time we have together. So I want to close by just naming a few of the benefits of interlocking justice. The first is innovation is constant. So if you are engaging in these 5 practices of interlocking justice, and relationships are being built across groups, and people are being exposed to new information and new ways of doing things and new worldviews, this is going to result in more imaginative ways of accomplishing things. um, so innovation is going to become the norm. There's going to be creativity that is just constantly flourishing, and things are going to be reimagined. So there's something beautiful about the way life is going to be constantly happening. Second is everyone's work becomes more effective. So I think there's this fear anytime we try and implement justice or do things a new way that it's going to make us sludge through work, it's going to make things slower. And it might seem like that in the forefront, but in the long run, it becomes more effective. So depending on the nature of a relationship, there's the possibility of creating change on both a wider and deeper level by working together. So on an individual or group level, people get a deeper understanding of the ripple effects of their work. They get a more intersectional and expansive approach to how they meet needs. Um, they figure out more detailed ways of doing their work. There's just so much in how they're able to approach their work that makes them more effective in doing it, makes them more effective in serving or accomplishing whatever it is they were doing in the first place. And again, exposes them to new ideas, which in turn makes you more effective. Um, this one is really important to me. Access is made possible. So, one of the things that I'd named early on were some of the toxic things that we recreate. And a myth of scarcity is one of the things that we recreate, even in justice spaces. So, when access is made possible, we reject this myth of scarcity. We reject the urge to protect our own turf. Um, and this means we get to expand our networks. We get to help one another expand our networks. Um, we might get relationships with new um, funders, with new resources, so many things. We get introductions, doors open to us that weren't available before, that were once closed to us. We get new opportunities, so access is made possible. And we just do away with this idea that we have to wait in a line, that there's only so many slices of the pie available. Sustainability is achieved. So the more of an interlocking approach to justice is internalized by everyone within a group, the more likely you are to remain engaged in justice work long after your own interests are met. So the problem with only being involved in justice because of your interest in one issue or one problem is if that gets resolved or that immediate need is met, then your passion is might dissipate, might be alleviated. But if you learn to be concerned with this big movement, capital M, large umbrella, you learn to have this interlocking approach, then you're in it for the long haul. People are able to mature as justice seekers across a lifetime rather than a season. Their commitment isn't just to a person or a problem or to a specific group, it's to the idea of justice and to liberation itself. You shift attentions, shifting attentions from one cause or one group is less likely to leave people feeling demoralized. They stay in it. You don't lose them in the same way. Hi, Fran. And then this last one, again, speaking of ones that are particularly important to me, all the work is remembered, if not done, in all the spaces. So, what this means is marginalized groups are not pushed further to the margins. When you take an interlocking justice approach, even if you're not doing all the work in all of the spaces, you are still considering all of the work in all of the spaces. And marginalized groups are not pushed further to the margins. A deaf person can go to a reproductive justice event and know there will be translators and captioning equipment. A transgender person can go to a climate justice event and know there will be all gender restrooms available. A person who's living in poverty can go to an anti racism event because scholarships are available and registration fees are intentionally not prohibitive. That is what it is to take an interlocking justice approach. You may not address all issues, but you are considering of all issues. So, that is interlocking justice. It is a lot, but you've had a brief introduction to the continuum, to the 5 practices: restorative, integrity, community, convergence, and expansive, some crucial considerations, and a few benefits of interlocking justice. I want to leave you with one last weekly challenge. What would it look like to begin taking steps forward with each practice on an individual and on a collective level? What would you need for yourself to make that happen? What would you need from your community? What would you be risking? And what would you have to gain? I really appreciate y'all having me this last 4 weeks. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Um, we're done. That's it for now. Thank you.